Hey, it's Greg Brown, the storyteller, poet laureate of aviation. Grab your logbook, because it's time for another flying carpet cockpit adventure. I'm an aviation author, adventure columnist, photographer, and former National Flight Instructor of the Year. The Flying Carpet is a 4-place single-engine light airplane. In it, my wife Jean and I have long traveled the North American continent, searching behind clouds for the real America. Learn more at my website, gregbrownflyingcarpet.com, where you can also see photos from most episodes. While there, order one of the few remaining autographed copies of my aviation adventure book, Flying Carpet, The Soul of an Airplane, for which I was named Barnes & Noble Arizona Author of the Month. Most pilots experience a frightening event or two in the course of their flying, but here's one hopefully few of us will ever encounter. Today's episode involves my friend, designated pilot examiner, that's DPE, and airline captain, Jim Pittman. This story took place back in 2009 when Jim served as Western Regional Manager for Cessna Pilot Centers. So climb into my flying carpet, buckle up your seatbelt, and prepare to take off on today's episode, Nabbed, Perils of a Dream Pilot Job. Clear prop. So tell us about your arrest, says my friend Mark to our host, Jim Pittman. It wasn't an arrest, replies Jim, chuckling. I was, quote-unquote, temporarily detained. At Jim's invitation, Mark and I have flown from Flagstaff to check out the new 2009 single-engine Cessnas at a Phoenix Deer Valley Airport open house. Jim is Western Regional Manager for Cessna Pilot Centers, covering much of the Mountain and Pacific West, plus Alaska and Western Canada. Basically, I'm a business coach, Jim explains over lunch. My job is to help flight schools be more successful. I particularly enjoy mentoring flight instructors on customer service, customer retention, and getting the most out of the Cessna pilot training curriculum. Do you fly that territory yourself? Asks Mark, as we head to the flight line. It's a rough life, says Jim, tongue-in-cheek. Cessna assigns me a brand-new 172, and any appointments within about 600 miles I fly to myself. He pats the cowl of his sparkling Skyhawk. Last week I called on Cessna Pilot Centers in St. George, Salt Lake City, Ogden, and Heber City, Utah. Pretty productive for a one-night trip from Phoenix, eh? I took off Thursday morning, made 4 appointments, and was home before dinner on Friday. A glimmer appears in Jim's eye. That trip was particularly amazing because Utah is covered in snow right now. I grew up in Phoenix and I don't like snow. But flying over white-capped mountains in my cozy little Skyhawk with the heater on was just beautiful. Everything went as planned, and I found myself thinking, here I am flying a new Cessna with the same avionics as a modern jet. Jim next describes flying 2 hours north from Seattle to visit the Cessna Pilot Center at Vernon, British Columbia. I'd never been to Canada before. The mountains were awesome, and to experience crossing the border and dealing with customs was fun. For that matter, Jim delights in almost every trip. Having largely flown around Phoenix, he says, most of my instrument time is simulated. But with California in my territory, I now get frequent opportunities to pop through cloud layers and do some instrument work. I remember flying from Santa Rosa to Napa one morning. There was sunshine on top of the clouds, and a beautiful white layer beneath me. ATC put me in a holding pattern, The autopilot was doing all the work, and I just sat there smiling ear to ear. It was one of those times when you sense how fast you're going because you're skimming the cloud tops. And it was like, man, they pay me to do this? A trim young man in his early 30s, Jim has always been interested in aviation. He flew radio-controlled planes starting at age 11 and started flying lessons at 16. I paid for my own training all the way through, he boasts. After teaching in Arizona State University's flight program, he served as chief flight instructor for West Wind School of Aeronautics here in Phoenix until taking the Cessna position. I asked Jim how we could better introduce such joys of flying to more prospective pilots. Several generations ago, flying was considered magical, Jim explains. There's a reason people dreamed about it for thousands of years. But to the general public today, flying is no longer magical. To those of us who fly, being at the controls is still magical, but those who haven't started yet can't know that. They think looking out a little airline's side window is somehow comparable to piloting an airplane. So when it comes to whatever this magic is my pilot friend is always talking about, I don't get any kick out of that airliner, so why would I want to fly a small airplane? Of course, piloting is totally different than being a passenger. Unfortunately, you could put that on all the billboards in the world. But until people actually try it, it's like, whatever. That's why pilots reaching out to their friends is still the best way to promote flying. It seems that most pilots are lousy at sharing aviation with others, he observes. We have our buddies at the airport, but to actually go out of our way to invite a nephew or a cousin to go on a flight, each of us must have the desire to reach out. Just get them into the air and get them behind the controls. People who have piloting in their blood will get lit on fire right away, just like us when we first started. I'm convinced that plenty of people have the time and money to become pilots, but have no clue how much they'd enjoy it. Flying is not about being cost-effective, continues Jim. It's about living your dream. When someone asks, what does it cost to learn to fly, my answer is, about as much as a used car. That avoids the sticker shock issue. And if they're really serious, they ask, what type of used car? And I say, just like there are all types of used cars, there are many ways to approach flight training. You really can't answer the questions of what will it cost and how long will it take until you've given a few lessons to that person and determined their aptitude. But before then, who knows? So what about the arrest? Asks Mark, not to be deterred. Temporary detention, corrects Jim, wagging his finger. Okay. This airplane right here, November 50545, is the first production 2009 Skyhawk. I picked it up at the factory in Independence, Kansas, and did an acceptance flight. Other than with test pilots, it's the first time this plane ever flew. Then I took off for Wichita for some company meetings. When I landed in Wichita, a cop car approached me with armed airport police. The officers were friendly but serious. They said they needed to detain me and ask some questions. Honestly, at first I thought my coworker, who was in the FBO office, was pulling a prank on me. When the police first came up, I asked them 2 or 3 times, "You're joking, right?" But about the time they put me in handcuffs and locked me in the police car, well, I don't know the law, but I don't think they're allowed to joke with handcuffs. That's when I knew this was for real, and of course was completely cooperative. Now, obviously this was a misunderstanding, and it was just a matter of time to clear up whatever misinformation they had, but there's something surreal about being handcuffed for the first time, especially when you know you're innocent. As it turned out, federal authorities had phoned the airport police shortly before I landed saying, "This airplane is stolen." So although friendly, the officers took their job very seriously. They took me into custody and made some phone calls. 20 minutes later, they posed for a picture with me, and that was the end of it. "So what was the issue?" asks Mark. "As you know," said Jim, "new airplanes are often assigned discontinued tail numbers from the past. Based on an internet search afterward, I learned that my new Skyhawk's N number was last registered to a 1968 Cessna 150. That airplane had been stolen years earlier, back in 2002, and disappeared off the radar. But apparently the N number remained on the National Crime Information Center, NCIC, stolen aircraft database, even after it was released for reuse in 2005. So when I checked in with Kansas City Air Traffic Control Center after takeoff from Independence, authorities flagged the N number and called the cops. Of course, my coworker told everyone the story for the following 3 days of company meetings. The CEO of Cessna now knows who Jim Pittman is. Again, he laughs. The CEO sat down beside me. I didn't even have a name tag on, and he said, "You know, Jim, the police called me this morning asking about our hiring procedures. I had to tell them that although we do background checks, a few slip through the cracks." At that, he laughed and patted me on the back. "In any case," says Jim, "I'm glad the incident happened to me rather than a customer." I asked Jim if he'd been worried about getting detained again at his next flight stop. "I certainly was, Greg. Not knowing how well the government entities communicate with each other, I phoned my wife Tori before taking off for Albuquerque a few days later and warned her to call the police if she didn't hear from me when I landed. My eyes were wide open when I touched down at Albuquerque, but thankfully nothing happened." Our curiosity appeased, Mark and I examine a gleaming new 200-knot Cessna Corvallis 400. "Next week I'm flying this beauty around California," says Jim with undisguised glee. This guy is having so much fun spreading the good word about flying that maybe he deserves to get arrested. Or at least temporarily detained. One would hope Jim's experience would be the end of this story, but it wasn't. Despite assurances that the Cessna's N number would be cleared from the stolen aircraft database, apparently it wasn't. 18 months later, in what sounds like a far more frightening experience, renowned pilots and educators John and Martha King of King Schools were intercepted and detained at gunpoint upon landing the same aircraft at Santa Barbara, California. I've posted links in this episode's show notes and on my website to John King's Flying Magazine article about the harrowing experience, entitled "Sky Kings, Innocent Pilots Face Down Guns and Handcuffs." You'll find the King's experience disturbing and compelling. See photographs from this episode on my website. Thanks for riding along on today's Flying Carpet adventure. Find photos from most episodes at gregbrownflyingcarpet.com. While there, order one of the few remaining autographed copies of my aviation adventure book, Flying Carpet, The Soul of an Airplane, for which I was named Barnes & Noble Arizona Author of the Month. You'll also find my other aviation books there, and my Views from the Flying Carpet aerial photography available in fine art metal prints. Please support this podcast by sharing your favorite episodes on social media, posting reviews on your favorite podcast directories, and donating via gregbrownflyingcarpet.com. I welcome your feedback via my website, via my Flying Carpet Podcast Facebook group. Finally, follow my social media sites by searching Greg Brown Flying Carpet, and consider joining my Student Pilot Pep Talk Facebook group. Thanks, Carter Olson, for the tagline. Music by Hannes Brown. See you next time.